It was during a routine night patrol through the vast Chantilly forest in northern France that a discovery sparked an unexpected hunt for a killer. A killer who not only took pleasure in murder, but in taunting the police while operating right under their noses. I'm your host Prash, and welcome to this episode of Prash's Murder Map. A member of the gendarmerie, the force responsible for policing the rural parts of France, came across an abandoned Peugeot 504 in a forest lay-by and ran a routine license plate check. The car had been stolen from a supermarket car park 70 miles away in Somme. Coincidentally, it was registered to another gendarme, whose wife had left the keys in the ignition while shopping, which was not unusual as car thefts were relatively rare at the time in May 1978. But when the patrolman looked more closely, he realised there was more to the Peugeot than first appeared. There were 2 bullet holes in the windscreen, and on the back seat he found a blood-stained tissue, a checkbook, a rope, a briefcase, a hypodermic syringe, and several 9mm cartridge casings. Outside the car were scattered Gitan's branded cigarette butts and a piece of paper titled Pierrefonds Post Office, covered in handwritten notes and diagrams that appeared to outline a planned robbery. Henri Cavalli, head of Chantilly Gendarmerie, suspected that the bloodstains might indicate a murder, but he was disappointed when the public prosecutor instead handed the case to the judicial police in nearby Cray. When the car and its contents were examined more closely, no clear evidence of a crime was found. The syringe was empty and showed no trace of narcotics. Along with the fact that the Peugeot had been poorly concealed and left in an area with nightly patrols, it looked like the entire scene had been staged. 2 months later, in July 1978, 17-year-old Karine Grosspiron was walking home from the cinema in Pont-Saint-Maxence, a small town 7 miles north of Cray. As she made her way along the pavement, a red Renault 12 drove past her, did a U-turn, and came back in her direction. Before Karine had time to realise what was happening, the driver wound down the window and fired 3 rapid shots, then sped away into the night. Karine was a performer in a Wild West reenactment, and for a brief moment she registered that the sound was different from the cap guns used during performances. She felt agonising pain in her left leg and screamed for help, but she was able to take note of the driver's appearance and the licence plate number. The vehicle had recently been stolen from a farmer who had left the keys in the ignition along with his checkbook while shopping. It was a familiar story to investigators who had worked on the staged Peugeot 504 case a couple of months earlier. Because of the location of the shooting, the Cray police had jurisdiction again. Forensic tests confirmed that the weapon used was a 9mm Beretta, but investigators could identify no motive and no one with any reason to target the 17-year-old. A few days later, a police officer in Cray spotted the red Renault 12 parked at the side of the road and radioed it in. With no reason to suspect danger, he approached the vehicle without waiting for backup. As he reached for the door handle, a bomb detonated. There was a blinding flash and a deafening explosion, triggered by a booby trap connected to the car's interior light. The officer survived, but suffered second-degree burns, and a team of Cray officers searched every inch of the vehicle for evidence, but the explosion had destroyed almost everything. The only thing left was a partial fingerprint on the wing mirror, a middle finger. Its placement appeared deliberate, and police interpreted it as an insult, a wordless message aimed directly at them. After the bombing, police surveillance was increased at car parks, bus stations and train stations across northern France. On 8th of August, the Creil police commissioner received an anonymous letter postmarked from Pont-Saint-Maxence. The writer quoted the license plate number of the stolen red Renault 12 and claimed to be the bomber, enclosing the vehicle registration document to prove it. The author showed no remorse for the officer's injuries, writing that he should have been more careful. He also claimed responsibility for the shooting of Karine Grosspiron, writing, "Karine knows me, but she can never make the connection. A 17-year-old girl who roams the night is a target I particularly like. Next time, I will aim for the heart and not the legs." He went on to claim that he had rigged bombs in 3 more cars, and ended the letter with the words, "I'm a killer, therefore I'm going to kill." The letter was signed not with a name, but with a single question mark. It was clear that the perpetrator intended to remain hidden while deliberately taunting the police. The police commissioner circulated copies of the letter to his colleagues. One landed on the desk of Inspector Daniel Neveu, a quiet, unassuming man whose razor-sharp intuition had earned him the nickname Maigret, after the famous fictional French detective. Neveu studied the letter carefully and compared the handwriting with the hold-up plan found in the first stolen car. They matched, establishing a clear link between the Peugeot 504 and Renault 12. He took the letter home to show his wife, who worked as an accountant at a department store where she frequently dealt with stolen checks and liaised with gendarmes over shoplifting cases. She noticed that the style of the letter, with frequent commas and full stops, reminded her of a gendarme's report. Neveu agreed, spotting other similarities. For example, the car was written in full as Renault R12, when most people would shorten it to just R12. It also used phrases like "in the interior of the vehicle," where most people would simply say "inside the car." Could it be that the man who shot a young woman and nearly killed a police officer was himself a member of the gendarmerie? Neveu's superior officer agreed with his suspicions. However, the regional chief declared the evidence insufficient and refused to open an inquiry into the gendarmes concerned it would worsen tensions between the two forces, which already often clashed over jurisdiction. Police bosses pressured Neveu to drop the matter, a decision that would delay justice and have catastrophic consequences. No further violence occurred for the next few months, but 21 of the checks stolen from the Renault 12 were cashed in shops across the region. Police interviewed the shop owners, who admitted they had accepted the checks without ID because the customers seemed friendly and trustworthy. Piecing together their descriptions, the police learned that the man was in his late 20s, clean-shaven, good-looking and immaculately dressed. He was said to have a military bearing, a detail that stood out because gendarmes, unlike the civil police, have military training. He drove an Alpine sports car and purchased petrol, books, magazines and camping equipment before dining at a gourmet restaurant in Noyon, 40 miles north of Creil, where he paid with another stolen cheque. Shortly afterwards, the Alpine was found abandoned in front of the offices of regional newspaper Le Courrier Picard. The car had been wiped clean of prints, except for one middle fingerprint on the wing mirror, exactly like the one seen on the Renault 12. On 16th of November 1978, a man driving a Peugeot 504 knocked a woman off her bicycle in Clermont, then dumped the car 48 hours later near the railway station. This time, it was the Clermont branch of the gendarmes who found it. Information sharing between the police and gendarmes was limited. The police viewed their military counterparts as amateurs, while the gendarmes saw the police as elitist, so their lack of caution when opening the car door may have reflected this mutual mistrust and a lack of awareness of the recent bomb. Once again, a flash and a bang erupted as a bomb detonated, seriously injuring a gendarme. His colleagues, Alain Lamare and Patrick Dubois, rushed in to douse the flames. Lamare seemed particularly troubled by the attack and spoke forcefully about tracking down the perpetrator. Even though one of their own had been injured, the case was once again handed to the regional police. Refusing to stand by, the gendarmes took matters into their own hands and launched their own investigation, led by the determined Captain John Pinault, affectionately nicknamed Columbo by his colleagues. Meanwhile, the assailant continued his string of crimes. A local post office was robbed and the suspect escaped in a car that, like the others, had been opportunistically stolen after the keys were left in the ignition. Police matched a fingerprint from this car to a cartridge casing found in the first stolen Peugeot in Chantilly forest, confirming the connection. However, Pinault and the gendarmerie were still unaware of this latest evidence. On Friday, 1st of December 1978, the anonymous letter writer carried out his threat that next time he struck, he would aim for the heart. 19-year-old Yolanda Rashevsky was found near death behind a hippodrome close to Chantilly, shot multiple times in the chest with a 9mm Beretta. On the way to the hospital, she was able to tell first responders that she'd been hitchhiking when the young, dark-haired man picked her up. At first, he'd been friendly and talkative, but then he told her he was going to hurt her. He drove behind the hippodrome, drew a gun from his jacket with his left hand, fired repeatedly, and then pushed her out of the car. Yolanda died later that day. Forensic analysis matched the bullets to the 9mm Beretta used to shoot Karine Grospiron 5 months earlier. The suspect they were seeking had officially become a killer. In the fallout from a series of media articles criticising both the police and gendarmes for their lack of progress, the two organisations were forced to cooperate and arranged a meeting to share information. When Pinault read the anonymous letter for the first time, he reached the same conclusion as Daniel Neveu. It had been written by an officer of the law. Pinault asked his superiors to compare the fingerprints to those of all local gendarmes and to cross-check the dates of the attacks with their shift patterns. They reluctantly agreed to check the dates, but refused to carry out the fingerprint analysis, and the half-hearted investigation produced no leads. On 29th of December, a witness was horrified to see a blood-soaked young woman being pushed out of a green Peugeot 504 in Compiègne, another commune in the Oise region, before the car sped away. The victim, 18-year-old hitchhiker André Poiret, woke up in hospital a few days later. She told police that the male driver had acted normally for the first few miles, but once they entered the cover of the forest, things took a sinister turn. He warned her that he intended to hurt her, then pulled a gun from his pocket with his left hand, shot her 3 times, leaned over, opened the passenger door, and shoved her out of the car. A photo fit was created from André's description, which matched the one compiled from the statements of shop owners who'd been paid with stolen checks by a seemingly friendly military man. André survived, but 2 bullets had entered her spine, leaving her permanently paralysed. On the afternoon André was shot, the green 504 was seen crossing a bridge at Croix Saint-Ouen, heading towards Le Meur, the site of a gendarmerie roadblock. Rain pelted the windscreen, so the driver turned the wipers on full. As he spotted the police presence ahead, he accelerated, ramming through the roadblock and sending traffic officers diving for cover. The stolen car raced off, tyres screeching on the wet road. The gendarmes jumped into their Citroën SMV6, an unlikely pursuit car fitted with a Maserati engine which gave it surprising power. They roared after the Peugeot, closing in as they approached a railway crossing. In a scene almost worthy of an action film, the 504 crossed the tracks just a second before a train thundered past, forcing the pursuing gendarmes to slam on the brakes. By the time the train had passed, the felon's car disappeared. The gendarmes found the vehicle a little further down the road, its wheel stuck in the mud, and the driver nowhere to be seen. K9 teams and 200 armed officers were called in from several brigades, while 2 helicopters circled overhead to search the marshy wetlands. Despite the massive effort, they could find no trace of the fugitive. The man would later claim he had dived into a pond and breathed through a hollow reed until the search parties left, then staggered along the railroad tracks under cover of darkness, soaked and freezing, towards Chantilly. Whether he actually did perform this feat of endurance is scientifically doubtful, but the boast revealed something about his personality. He would never be captured willingly. The press and public began to wonder if the man they were now calling the Oise Killer was emulating serial murderer Marcel Barbeau, known as the Shadow Killer, who had terrorised the region just a few years ago in the early 70s, shooting 7 women and 1 man, a case solved by the gendarmerie's own inspector, Daniel Never. Adding more fuel to the media frenzy, Captain John Pinot confided in his journalist friend Yvan Stefanovitch that he believed the Oise Killer was a policeman or gendarme. Stefanovitch chose to prioritise the scoop over honouring his word and issued a press release the next day, revealing Pinot and Never's suspicions, kindling even more public fear and mistrust. Around this time, the police received another taunting letter from the serial attacker. In it, he vowed to continue targeting young women, claiming he would make their heads explode. He said he would take a short break as the weather turned colder, but promised that when he returned, he would cut his victims' bodies into pieces and hide them across the city. The letter also included hints about his past. He claimed to have served in Africa as a member of the armed forces and to have lost his wife in a car accident. Neither claim was true. His next move would indirectly lead to his capture. Spotting another car with the keys left in the ignition, he took it for a joyride on the M10, driving at such high speeds that the timing belt snapped, forcing the vehicle to stop abruptly. He steered the car onto the hard shoulder, where 2 passing motorcycle officers noticed it and pulled over to assist. They ran a routine license plate check and were surprised to find the car was registered to the government's former transport minister. The driver claimed to be the minister's son, and since the car had not yet been reported stolen, the officers believed him and gave him a lift to a nearby garage. When they arrived, the young man fled, but it was too late. The officers had already seen him clearly enough to create a more accurate photo fit than the earlier version based on André Poiret's description. The new image was circulated to police stations and gendarmeries. At the Clermont station, Captain John Pinot's wife dropped in to see her husband and immediately recognised the face pinned to the notice board. Surprised, she asked, "Who are you looking for? Is it Alain?" Pinot, who hadn't yet examined the new picture, took a closer look and realised she was right. It was Alain Lamare, a 22-year-old gendarme who'd worked with Pinot before transferring to the Chantilly branch the previous year. In disbelief, Pinot called Henri Cavalli, the head of the Chantilly gendarmerie, and urged him to come over immediately, refusing to explain over the phone. When Cavalli arrived, Pinot asked bluntly, "What do you think of Lamare?" Cavalli replied that he was a good officer who happened to be his neighbour in the same apartment block. He was unmarried, passionate, determined about his work, and calm under pressure. He was also left-handed, just like the shooter, as survivors had remembered him pulling the trigger with his left hand. Cavalli was stunned. Alain Lamare had been one of the gendarmes working tirelessly to solve the case. He had spoken more strongly about the killer than most, urging colleagues not to stop until they brought him to justice, even describing the perpetrator as a bastard for going after girls like this. Could Lamare really have been helping his fellow officers search for himself while feigning outrage at the attacks? Cavalli checked Lamare's timetable and confirmed that the young officer had been on leave or off duty at the time of each incident, leaving him with no alibi. The tight-knit gendarmes community felt the betrayal as sharply as a bullet wound. A call went out for officers from all brigades to report back to the station under the pretext of a briefing on a major theft. Meanwhile, Pinot and Cavalli confided in a few senior officers that Lamare was their number one suspect. Lamare was out with a colleague at the time, and the pair headed back to the station together. That day, his partner had expressed concern because Lamare insisted on equipping himself with an excessive number of weapons for a routine patrol. When he stepped out of the car at the station, Cavalli saw with alarm that Lamare had a machine gun slung around his neck and a pistol in his belt. "Lamare, are you going to war or something?" he asked, keeping his tone light to avoid raising suspicion. "You don't need all that. Leave it outside." Lamare left the guns in the car and entered the station with his hands in his pockets. Concerned that he might have another weapon hidden, Cavalli signalled his men to apprehend him. As soon as Lamare stepped through the station door, several gendarmes grabbed him and pinned him to the ground, handcuffing him after a violent struggle. Cavalli asked if he knew why he was being arrested, and Lamare claimed ignorance, shouting, "Me? No, no, no." His fingerprints were taken and matched those lifted from the wing mirrors of the two stolen cars. Inspector Daniel Never of the Cray Police was informed, and amid his own relief that the perpetrator was not one of his own officers, he could sense the despair among the gendarmes. When Never visited the gendarmerie, Lamare was seated in a chair, handcuffed and surrounded by colleagues, some of whom were in tears. The realisation that he had not only been shooting and killing people right under their noses, but had also targeted his own friends with car bombs was utterly devastating. Lamare was escorted to his apartment block and told to sit in the kitchen while his home was searched. It was at this point that he spoke for the first time since his arrest, telling Cavalli, "You're lucky. Had I entered first, I would have grabbed the shotgun behind the door and killed you." Given the trail of destruction he had left behind, Cavalli had no doubt he meant it. Most of the apartment appeared normal, but one locked room revealed a different story. Inside was a collection of survivalist gear. A camouflage military tent was set up in the middle of the room, surrounded by war rations, maps, knives, guns, grenades, and bomb-making equipment, along with a diary noting the dates of each attack. At last, they had all the evidence they needed. Alain Lamare was transferred to the Senlis courthouse, his face covered by the hood of his raincoat to shield him from the press. That night, a senior officer persuaded him to sign a resignation letter in a desperate attempt to protect the gendarme's reputation. It was nothing more than a technicality, as although Lamare was no longer officially a gendarme, everyone knew that he'd been one at the time of the murders, which deeply affected public perception of law enforcement for years to come. Lamare chose to speak to the judge privately and confessed everything in a 5-hour interview, though he refused to explain his motives. He underwent several psychiatric evaluations, and although the first found him legally responsible for his actions, 3 other doctors diagnosed him with heboidophrenia, also called pseudopsychopathic schizophrenia, a subtle form of schizophrenia which is hard to detect and closely resembles a personality disorder. He was declared not guilty by reason of insanity, sparing him a public trial and the need to face his victims in court. He was committed to a psychiatric hospital indefinitely, where he remains today, although in recent years he has worked as a nursing assistant, helping other inmates with their medical needs. The exact cause of Alain Lamare's descent into murder is unknown. but it was clear that part of his motivation was a desire to feel intellectually superior while mocking law enforcement. Some colleagues had heard him speak of Marcel Barbeau, suggesting he may have been inspired by the notorious serial killer. Lamare had also grown up with a strict authoritarian father who worked for the civil service. Could his antagonism towards authority have been shaped by his upbringing, combined with the desire to outwit those at the top, in his mind, the senior members of the gendarmerie? More than 40 years later, former gendarme commander Henri Cavalli recalls the incident with sadness and frustration. Ex-police inspector Daniel Neveu still wonders if Lamare might have been caught sooner had the authorities been more receptive to his deduction that the killer was a gendarme. Perhaps if the police and gendarmes had shared information and worked together sooner, André Poiret and the victims of the car bombs could have been spared their injuries, and Yolanda Rashevsky's life might have been saved. You've been listening to Prash's Murder Map. If you'd like to support the show, please leave a thumbs up, comment or review. If you're on Spotify, I'd love it if you could leave me a rating. Patreon supporters get access to ad-free audio-only episodes, and you can also sign up separately to my free newsletter via my website for news and updates. I'll leave the links in the show notes. Thank you for your support, and I'll see you again soon.